Good afternoon, everybody. Today we're going to talk about an interesting topic with the director of the MENA region from the IMF, Dr. and former Minister, Dr. Jihad Azour. My name is Mehnahia, the director of the Carnegie Center in Beirut. Our talk today will be focused on the recovery choices in the Arab region. Jihad, welcome to this meeting. Yesterday there was a message in which you talked about the exacerbation of the economic and political crisis in the region, and especially the lockdown approaches in relation to the pandemic, and without taking enough precautions for the people concerned. But during the last period, and according to the study that was issued recently, we don't know whether the economic slump was expected, and there was some kind of vulnerability affecting the regional economics due to the pandemic 19. The last time we talked about this topic in 2020, EU determined a certain number of priorities for the region to resolve the COVID-19 pandemic, to provide social protection for the limited income people. Number two, to speed up the economic recovery. And number three, to get ready for the speed up the economic recovery. Now, what message can you send to the government regions and their degree of commitment to abide by these priorities? Thank you, Meha. At the outset, thank you for inviting me to this meeting. This is a good opportunity again to talk about the situations prevailing in the region today, and less than 1 year after the triggering of the pandemic, coronavirus 19. And 1 year after the eruption of one of the biggest crises, which is threatening the international and the regional economies for the last century or so, we can probably revisit most of the emerging challenges and to take stock of the current situation. You have raised so many important questions about the evaluation of the measures taken during the last period and how they will impact the forthcoming period. First of all, let me focus on three important items. What happened precisely last year? Undoubtedly, the coronavirus 19 is an international pandemic, but in the region it was more profound and more impactful. In addition to the consequences of this pandemic for the region, to come to grips with this danger, there was a great impact on the oil markets, which play a paramount role, not in the oil economies, but in neighboring economies, due to the important changes. Also, this kind of crisis did impact so many sectors that are closely related to the social movement, and especially the tourist sector, which is important in many countries in the region. Last but never least, the region is quite different by the very nature of its economy. For this, we have to bear in mind that we have to delve into details for these countries to be able to put up with this crisis, especially the countries which are going through some conflicts or lack of instability. So, for instance, the regression of the growth rate, which exceeded less minus 12% versus plus 3% in the region. And this illustrates a lot of discrepancies in the region. What happened exactly in this region? These countries took some immediate measures. First, to protect the lives of the citizens, and in spite of the disparities in terms of economic and health capacities, there was a sudden increase of the measures which did alleviate the propagation of this pandemic compared to other regions. The For instance, the number of deaths or contamination in the region is much better off compared to some other regions all over the world. The second stage and the recovery here, there's some kind of discrepancy. There are some states which employed some mechanisms to ensure the follow-up to open up its economy little by little. And this is what we saw in some GCC states, and some countries were a little bit delayed in doing so. And the second wave was much more important and impactful. There is another element which is paramount here as well. It's the possibility to get the vaccine. There is a huge competition between the second wave of this pandemic and the use of the vaccine for everybody. Now, this is the prelude to a recovery, and the vaccine is also considered as the element to conducive to social stability, and due to the measures that we have to take in order to save as many lives as we possibly could. Now, this is important in 2021, given that we are all eager for a recovery era, which would happen at staggered levels. It would be more impactful in some countries than others. Now we are in an era which highlighted some challenges which also existed during the first wave, and also which highlighted some weaknesses, like the size or the impact of the informal sector in the area, like the impact of this pandemic on the vulnerable categories or the most marginalized ones, like the youth category. And also, we are going through a period whereby, globally speaking, to get out of this crisis will have definitely some a significant impact on the regional countries. First, they have to go on protecting human lives, and this is important due to the hovering threats. And even the states that are really unable to ensure some additional resources, they have to give this priority top importance. The second recommendation that we can give here, now it's still impending to make sure that there is continuity, even partially, for the subsidies provided to the citizens in order to protect them socially, and especially for the SMEs, each one according to his or her own capacity. Number three, we have to speed up the recovery progress. Examples from the past can be quite insightful, especially the international crisis. The delay in getting ready for the recovery would cause huge losses for the state in terms of years and even decades. And this is also prelude to some social and economic disparities, and the prelude to some social unrest. The way it is being dealt with differs from one country to another. And during the forthcoming period, there is an added value for the implementation of the regional cooperation effort to help minimize the impact of the impact, given that you talked about the regional cooperation, and you took into account the disparities between the states. We have a huge disparity
between the different countries, and considering that there are many countries that have been going through political conflicts, let alone those who are going through, obviously, wars. Now, what kind of cooperation can we talk about? Or how can we enhance links between countries? And how can we understand the impact of what is happening in one country on other countries? We cannot approach all countries in any form of isolation. We know that this is a common predicament that concerns all of us. So what measures can be taken to reinforce this link between all countries? This is a very important subject, definitely, and there's been long talk about this subject. If we want to be realistic in the short or medium term, I think we need to focus on the pandemic. We need to make sure that the biggest possible number of vaccines reach the country, not only to get out from this pandemic, but also to protect all chances for recovery. Now, there are many countries which have different sources of access to the vaccines, while others will not be able to get the vaccines before 2022, especially those that focus, though that whose only access to vaccine is through the WHO and COVAX, precisely. For this reason, I think this is a common ground that we need to develop for all of the countries of the Arab region. Second, the problems relating to the measures, especially as regards the workers we have in other countries. We saw that this was one of the weakest points, especially for the workers coming from other countries, or even for those categories that are available in different parts of the region. But we saw, and this is a positive point, some of the countries, especially the Gulf countries, have developed some flexible points in their laws. And these are definitely good indicators. On the short run, we need to reinforce the technological networking in the countries of the region, because this will allow for exchange of information, but also it opens a new space for diversity. Let me give you an example. Now, considering today the development of electronic transactions, you can see that this guarantees a form of basic support for some marginalized or vulnerable categories. You know, remittances from outside for a country like Sudan represents 15% of the GDP. So this is a lifeline for some of the social categories. Now, this has necessarily positive repercussions on the country. Another subject, and it is very important for the whole region, is the one that relates to the internally displaced populations. Those people who are internally displaced, or again, this is a very important point, technology could be of extremely helpful contribution there, because this could provide health protection services or healthcare services that are very important for them. This is concrete, as you can see, especially considering the pandemics. And some of the measures encourage Gulf countries uh, to reconsider the possibilities of joint collaboration. And these points can be important for future collaboration. Inshallah, Jihad, God willing, yes, definitely the idea of cooperation between the countries of the region is absolutely key if we want to overcome the pandemics or any other kind of crisis. Let me now move to another question. Uh, I would like you to assess the IMF's performance in helping countries address the issues they have faced on fiscal terms, that is to say, in terms of financial collaboration and monitoring, but also in helping emerging markets. The IMF has tried to understand this crisis and to adapt to it. This is a new situation, and this is why we needed to have new mechanisms, including quick financing for countries that do not have enough financial capacities to address social but also healthcare issues. Um, in the region, there is something like $17 billion of additional financing. Compared to last year, there is an increase of 65% on 1 year as regards investment or financing. This took different forms. There is what you may call direct support to help countries without, it's unconditional, without any conditions, but there are other forms. There are donations, as this is the case with the Yemen, or perhaps exemption or exoneration from debt, as is the case with Somalia, and we're working on something similar with Sudan. There are many countries in the region with emerging markets that were based on financial markets, and the fund used to play a very important role, and therefore it kept playing a very important role with quick intervention, as is the case of Egypt with $2.2 billion. This was a rapid support provided to Egypt, but $2.5 million was to reinforce macroeconomic stability while waiting for recovery of the market. The same applies to Morocco. There was a line of $3 million that was taken away, and this helped Morocco to regain its financial capacity. This we have also um, adjusted programs with countries like Jordan to provide for the basic uh, expenses. We have stride in this period, this phase, and because of the challenges diversity of the challenges. And because these are challenges of a new type, we also try to uh, help countries to adapt quickly and promptly to the requirements of the pandemics. However, there is one point, and this is something key for us. This is what we call technical assistance. Because of the pandemics or the crisis, it's difficult to provide it directly. And this is why we develop technological tools to be as close as possible to our countries in order to guarantee technical assistance. Now, obviously, our role changes with the change of the economic situations. We focus on new programs that help countries face and address post crisis period. We also want to reinforce our position in Beirut to provide technical support so that this technical support helps serve better and more quickly and more promptly the interests of the country. Excellent. Since you have touched upon the issue of recovery, well, last year you also uh, talked about the problem about this recovery, and you talked about the dislocation perhaps as being even more dangerous than natural disasters. Do you still think that this description still applies to the country, to the region? And if we're talking about new economic model, what prospects of achieving this and what form can it take? Maha, you're raising here a very important issue. Well, unfortunately, we don't have answers to all of the points that it includes. We need to understand the kind of crisis we're going through. As we said, this is a crisis with multiple aspects and multiple facets, and its impact is different from one country to another. But also within the countries, within one and the same country, you will see that it impacts one sector more than another, as it is the case for export sector, for touristic sector. And obviously, it impacted more some countries more than others, like Tunisia, Morocco. But also, we could see that the crisis has more impact than informal sectors. We could also see that those who find it difficult to work from afar, like remote working, are more impacted by the crisis. This applies more to women, as you can see, because they have perhaps more difficulties in working on social networks. Now, these categories, if they are not helped, or if the problems they face are not addressed, you can see that this will impede in one way or another the growth rates. This, as you can see, also will uh, raises the issue of inclusion, a problem that the region has always been called on to address. But today it has become particularly crucial. Now, the question that you're asking regarding the economic model, as you know, throughout history, all crises will engender or generate new models because they need to face these new models are going to introduce a crucial change that will, or at least speed up change. Any crisis is the occasion for us to reposition ourselves or reevaluating the situation. Many countries are working on repositioning themselves and on reassessing the situations to see how to gain benefit from the use of technologies. You can see that many sectors have improved, while others have regressed because of their use or absence of use of this technology. You can see that technology has become one driving factor of evolution and growth. Also, we need to make the environment propitious and conducive to um, attracting investment. You can see many of the direct transactions of investments have regressed, which caused the regression of growth, of which caused more social pressure, and which eventually led to more social and economic instability. And this is a subject that you've been working on. For this reason, today we are before a very important landmark. Our message, is that the absence of any delay in evaluating the impact of this crisis and the fact of speeding up uh, transformation and drawing benefits from the crisis are important and key factors that guarantee a new form of renaissance. And today we're celebrating the 10th anniversary of what has been called Arab Spring. In part, it was due to the feeling that many social categories had of being marginalized. Today, unfortunately, in many countries, this feeling has not been dissipated. On the contrary, maybe it's been deepened. This is why we need to work on growth strategy, a strategy that adapts to the new challenges and that can obviously draw benefits from the experiences available. I know that there's been a lot of frustration in the countries, but there are other countries that have gone through uh, frustrations, but that led to positive transformations. It may take time, and people have to understand that transformation takes time. This is why today we are going through a period of time that is not that is precious somehow, but it opens uh, possibilities to review some situations that we have gone through, but that perhaps today we need to review. Now you have opened a very
Now,
important
you opened up a
door
large
on discussions,
door
and
for
this
debate about the
relates
Arab Spring, and
directly to
also
the question of
one of the impacts of the coronavirus 19 is related to the topic of the youth and for the graduate and undergraduate youth and who are looking for more job opportunities and also who are employed in the informal sector and, as you said, are probably the first victims of this pandemic. What is the way out of this straitjacket? Because I would like to link it to something else that is related to invest in the infrastructure and to the green economy, or to infrastructure and to digitalization to speed up the recovery process and to avoid the loss of a whole decade. Now, can you connect the topic of unemployment, which threatens the youth, and the kind of new economy that probably will have a different impact on the employability in the region, which is suffering from a high rate of unemployment? As an institution and personally, I have worked exhaustively on this specific topic. I do consider that this topic is one of the major challenges that the region has to meet. This crisis did highlight new aspects because the informal sector is the most impacted one, and it has really unable to take profit from this region in For instance, Morocco, and thanks to the ICT, they have ensured the livelihood for 5 million families, and unemployment is probably poised to increase 17% in countries like Tunisia. In Jordan, it has increased to more than 24%. But today we live in a region where two-thirds of it are below the age of 30. And in the forthcoming years, for the 5 to 10 years, we need some 25 to 30 million job opportunities. These job opportunities that we do need, of course, we need probably some graduate people in some specific sectors, like the ICT sectors. How can we ensure best opportunities for this sector as such? And the studies here have confirmed that the need to get the final inclusion is rather weak in the region. It doesn't hardly exceed 4 to 5% in a region which is provided with big funding opportunities, and where the liquidity does exist compared to some other states, some other emerging states, where this ratio does exceed the 16 to 17%. Of course, to fill in this gap today, and if we try to provide the financial means to fund the small enterprises and the forthcoming projects, it will have a positive impact in the region. The role of the young woman is also important. If we decrease the participation rate on a gender basis in the region, within a 10-year time, we can ensure more than $1,000 billion for the region. Number three, there are some sectors today which are located within the ICT sector, which rely on the emerging and on the private initiatives. So we have to ease off the procedures conducive to setting up the private companies, and to employ some measures, and to give a way to the entrepreneurs to have access into the market. So this technological aspect plays a paramount role in the infrastructure sector. The environment friendly economy is also important, and we can invest billions of dollars in this field. And of course, the diversity of energy resources and the decrease of gas emission will improve the economies. This transitional system does need time and does need extra resources, and this is where cooperation is important. But if we keep the previous model, whereby the state is the only one to provide the job opportunities, and normally, of course, they cannot provide these opportunities for people who can produce even more. So the economic growth rate would be less than the demographic rate, and therefore the economic growth will not be as expected. So we need some kind of rehabilitation. Now, in the post-period time, we need to focus on these efforts and on the social sector that should be redesigned afresh, like social protection and the healthcare systems and the education systems. Here we have to make sure that the technology is the best leverage to fill in the gap, and not to widen even further the gap between the different social categories. Any system must be conducive to the reanalysis of the social systems, that must take into account the current situation. There are many countries which does not allow more, of course, closed economy, but they need some kind of economic boom and more job opportunities. The income discrepancies between the rural and the urban areas is one of the major elements that should be scrutinized here, in order to probably provide more solutions. And here, the role of the region, if it is clear in this context, it will entice so many international institutions to bring their support. The G20 can play an important role. Saudi Arabia was the leader in the G20 last year, and it is really able to have a great impact in this context. And even the G7 does focus a lot on this context. For the same reason, we need some global efforts, and we need, of course, some more audacity to deal with these reforms, which are more impending than ever. And these reforms, if sometimes they do have a great impact, but the impact should help us to bring forth more solutions and to provide more reforms. Among the audacious initiatives in the Arab world is the need to revisit the educational process, not in terms of quantity, but in terms of quality. The nature and the content of the teaching curricula in the Arab world should be revisited. Now, of course, here we have to train the pupils to think individually and to be self-dependent in order to be more useful within society. This is quite debated within the Arab societies nowadays. Thank you for emphasizing this point, which could be prelude for a quick progress, and it could also expand and exacerbate the gap existing, because today technology has been used to speed up many processes during the pandemic to get some e-learning for some social groups and to deprive some other groups from these opportunities. So it could be probably yet another reason to marginalize many categories. And this is at the very heart of any economic process for the moment. That should be top priority for the educational reforms and capacity buildings for analysis and to highlight the skills of the young people. Now, I'm sorry to interrupt. No, on the contrary, this is exactly what I wanted to infer. We have a question here from the audience saying that during the many publications of the IMF, there is a recommendation to impose solidarity tax for people to help put up with the impact of the coronavirus for the needy families. Do you support this initiative whereby we can impose a solidarity tax on the fortunes for the Arab world, and especially in line with the programs advocated by the fund? This is a very important topic here, and which is raised today, not in the Arab region only. Let me focus here on three separate items. First, there is an impending need to revisit the financial administration system, whereby we can lay down more tax equality. We need, of course, to provide solutions to some weaknesses that supersede this tax system, and especially to identify the area that are considered as some tax evasion opportunities. In other words, there will be equal opportunities between all people in terms of taxation. There is an increasing aspect here in order to distribute the burdens on an equal basis and not to use an easy process here. And this would definitely serve the region, and we have to focus on this aspect, given that the disparity in terms of income or in terms of economic situation is very large, and this is one of the big weaknesses in the region. Number two, we have to re-examine the tax system to allow the people who are operating in the informal sector to integrate the national economy. And in the forthcoming period, we have to make sure that we use the ICTs and to make better use of the financial systems. There is also a need not to make the economic cycle support more burdens. In other words, we have to avoid any negative impact on job generation, and this requires a whole set of reforms. I don't think that there is any subject that does not require to be revisited. I would like to refer to a study that we undertook recently about the social comfort and the social expenditure. The social expenditure is for specific, should be conducted for a specific objective to help the most vulnerable and marginalized categories to better survive. The social organization systems as well should be better re-examined. So at the local level, we have to introduce a new vision whereby the expenditure should be useful, and this public expenditure should be geared towards the most needy categories through a new social system. Number three, and it's also important here, it's the problem of transparency and the anti-corruption policies in the public expenditure. Now, in all the opinion polls, the citizens do emphasize the need to come to grips with this problem, and this is important to improve the good governance and the transparent administration of this system. We need some new rules and regulations and some new data and statistics and more participation from the grassroots. This is a technical work that will be really fruitful, and it's not in the political sector, and this is the study that we have posted on the website recently, which emphasizes the points that could probably benefit the region. Just if you increase the transparency rate and if you improve the mechanism conducive to the public procurements, and if you increase the participation in the decision taking within the financial sector through the participatory approach, this is alone will ensure a social quantum leap. And during the pandemic crisis, we have realized to what extent the trust of the citizens is important. We advocate here the need to revisit the public budgets, and we issue commands to reinforce the independence of the public institutions. We also recommend to make sure that there is a new relationship by involving the citizens in decision taking at a larger scale. There is a question from our colleague Sabina Aouid, who says, what are the invention system that you are talking about, and that could be suggested to the private sector in order to speed up the recovery from the coronavirus, which are suffering from the representative authorities and from so many deprivation and some economic slump and the absence of reforms, with specific reference to Lebanon. Now, we would like here to probably probe our way through the future of Lebanon if we want to avoid the economic slump this year. So how can Lebanon come out of this crisis? The question that is raised by Sabine, whom I salute here, and this applies both to Lebanon and many other countries. It goes without saying that today, if we wanted to underscore some indicators, any young person who is hard put trying to get the investment funds is due to the measures being used in many states, which impedes the young man or the young woman's capacity to set up his own business, whereas in some countries there are huge facilities in this context. For this reason, and for this international technical aspect, the enhancement of the funding mechanisms is paramount. And now we would like to ask whether this is enough per se or not. The answer is definitely yes. Also, there is a question that was raised by Sabine directly, whether in Lebanon and other countries, it's the competitiveness between the public and the private sectors to get more funds. And this applies to many countries, including to Lebanon, where this aspect did impact negatively the economic productivity. So, of course, the investor will.
Third subject, how to access markets. There are many countries where accessing markets has become a challenge because of the existence or availability of institutions that enjoy a very big space and they make it difficult for the private sector. This is why there has to be evaluation so that we make room for the private sector for them to invest and for them thereby to create new work or job opportunities. It's not because the role of the state has become big or perhaps more important under the pandemics. It doesn't mean that it's going to keep the same importance or significance, but it has to keep the same efficiency. Otherwise, we will uh, in order for us to realize the economic change so much longed for in the region. The weakness of institutions has proved itself to be one of the weakest, the most important weaknesses, and therefore we need to address it. A country like Yemen, for instance, the public sector was particularly weak, and but reinforcing the uh, human resources played an important positive role in alleviating the social uh, burden. And this is why we need to focus both on important or visible challenges, but also on tinier ones. We need, in all cases, to build institutions that are efficient and effective, institutions that are also autonomous and independent from any political interference in their work. I think you have mentioned a number of issues address that the region has to address, but perhaps they are even more so important for Lebanon. What conditions are required for more or better collaboration between Lebanon and IMF? And this is going to be the last question for our meeting today. Maha, as you know, and on a number of occasions, the director of the fund has said that the fund was ready to collaborate with Lebanon when the government is re-established, and therefore the dialogue between IMF and Lebanon would be reactivated. There is no doubt that the team of the fund is still in continuous relationship with their different ministries and other institutions. But what is required today for Lebanon is to have a genuine project or program of uh, rehabilitation for its economy, to launch its economy. We also need to address one very important issue relating to trust. Trust cannot be built unless the economy itself is put back on track, especially as the economy in 2020 and 2019 has faced regression, sometimes very um, sharp regression. If we add to this inflation, you can see the impact of negative impact on society in Lebanon because of the accumulation of this crisis. Any project and any program has to have a forward-looking vision for of growth. This obviously requires an activation of economy. For a country like Lebanon, it is necessarily built on human resources. Therefore, the rebuilding of trust is key, and innovation is again key in Lebanon. But there are also problems that have increased, like the social problem. We need to give the social dimension the due diligence and the due importance it has. What kind of role can an institution, financial institution like IMF play? It provides a general framework for countries that are ready to support Lebanon, to have therefore a general framework from which they could provide help. But it also shows that Lebanon does not only need investment, but also for donations, because Lebanon pays a lot for hosting many uh, Christians and to provide services and security for these categories. And therefore, the social community, international community has to make sure that this burden is alleviated on Lebanon. There is also a problem relating directly to the pandemic. As is the case with other countries, I think in Lebanon, we also need to speed up the acquisition and access to vaccines because despite all problems that Lebanon is facing, this would be a key entry for a recovery. Perhaps, yes, the region itself needs to have bigger quantities of vaccines. We're going to conclude with a final question, uh, and it is a question asked from the attendants. The question is, after the with the Biden administration now assuming office, have Iran's chances of obtaining an IMF loan increased? And would Tehran agree to the terms and conditions of an IMF package? Now, this is a question that was raised even before Biden comes to command, the relationship between Iran and the IMF. And this is old and continuous relationship. Uh, Under the pandemics, Iran asked submitted an application, and obviously all of us know that Iran was one of the first countries to have faced the impact of the pandemic. Uh, they asked for rapid facility. As I would like to remind you, it has no conditions, and there are many countries in the world, not only Iran, therefore, where the criteria we are not sure that the criteria are guaranteed. Technically speaking, we need to make sure that there is a need for supporting uh, expenses, and there is capacity of solvency capacity, and therefore capacity to pay back. And these are some of the conditions. We have reviewed clause 4 in 2018 with Iran. So therefore, this is why in Iran and other countries, this takes more time. And there are problems or difficulties because we cannot um, gain or obtain all the uh, required information in due time. But as you know, when there is a request from all countries, the 190 countries that are members of the IMF, all applications are submitted to the board, and the board makes decisions. But we have not reached yet this point. The board of directors is represented by all of these countries. We have not reached yet this stage. When once it is submitted to the board, then the board will make decisions in this respect. Thank you very much, Jihad, for this extremely exciting conversation. And I would like to thank all the attendants for following us. I hope to see you on other occasions. Thank you, Maha, for your hospitality. And let me also thank you for all that you've been doing, all the research and studies to deepen discussion on very sensitive and vital issues relating to the region. Thank you very much. Thank you.